then they get into the idea of marketing and media being there. And Omnicom is actually highlighting influencers and creators as its CES focus. And that's a fascinating new idea here, where Omnicom is coming in and talking about the world of content creators, coming in and talking about influencers. And they're basically launching this big study that they did at the end of last year to talk about the idea of how it's connecting its agency and its services into the influencer and content creator marketplace. So we'll pair that, and then I'm going to get Joe's take on all of this. We're going to pair that with another story that comes out of one of our favorite newsletters, which is a media operator. And the newsletter itself starts off with basically a question of what's next for the Messenger. And it talks about the Messenger being out of time and nearly out of money and all of that. But then it gets into a really interesting discussion, which pairs well with this CES thing, which talks about the creators and carrying key person risks. And as the newsletter says, there's a good story in Semaphore about the struggles of a media company Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith own. Westbrook having been since has been having since the slap, which I love the fact that he capitalized that. That's of course the Oscars slap about almost exactly a year ago, and basically they say that it's struggling. The show is struggling, and they acknowledge that. And some of that has to do with that. Is it the people that people are coming to see, or is it the show or the business or the media company that people are coming to see? And as he says here in his newsletter, the argument has always been that people like people. And so the creator economy has the belief that an audience would feel a much tighter connection to said creator, thus making it a stronger business. And yet, a creator is a key person. In other words, there's massive key person risk where one or few people possess all the knowledge or skills with a creator business. So basically, and he uses himself as an example, he says, if I leave a media operator, the business is dead. So the problem is basically that the key person in a content creator kind of business weakens the company, because there is all the risk is basically borne by your one key asset, which of course is the person. It's a fascinating thing in the context of everything we just talked about with Pat McAfee and the show and all of that. And also certainly has to do with Omnicom and their influencer and all of that sort of coming together. So bringing all those sort of points of data together, Joe, what is your take on the content creator business and where and how to sort of, I guess, mitigate that risk or create that value or whatever the sort of mandate is here?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a discussion with a bunch of content entrepreneurs, and we were talking about the difference between the creator business and a media business in and of itself. And from a business model standpoint, you and I know there's no difference at all. It's the same thing. You build an audience that knows, likes, and trusts you. You build some kind of a base that's a podcast, newsletter, whatever. And then you drive revenue mostly through media type revenue channels, like sponsorship or events or subscriptions or whatever. So that's what a media business does. And we'll talk more about that later. The difference is that a media company has multiple voices. That's really it. So if you look at risk, and you just have a creator, one creator, and whether or not that creator believes they're a media company or not, if you're just one creator, you're probably not a media business.
Right.
Because you don't have an asset outside yourself. And you and I know this really well. I mean, when we were, when I said, hey, I want to sell Content Marketing Institute, we talked about is Joe too much part of the business, and will somebody want to purchase CMI because it might be the Joe show? Well, lucky it wasn't. and CMI's just done just fine without me, and that's how you build an asset. You bring in other voices. Like you had very strong voice on the podcast with your regular columns in CMI. We had a number of wonderful editors and guest contributors, and it all worked together as sort of a community of creators, if you will. And I think that if you're a creator today, you need to be thinking about, how do I get to a media business model as quickly as possible? What's interesting about what Omnicom is doing is they're basically saying, okay, well, we're not going to put our all our assets into one basket, if you will. We're going to diversify across and bring in a number of influencers and show how important we are, and sort of bring in all the partnerships, all the distribution deals, and give them to a number of creators. It's the same thing. That one of the reasons why that we joined the HubSpot podcast network is because the belief is that HubSpot has a little bit more to offer because they have more systems in place, they have more relationships in place, and then we can come in as one of their creators and they can diversify across 50 different ones. So it's just interesting the way that this goes. And of course, the Smith, Jada, and Will Smith company, if you will, media company, most of those deals have Will Smith in the background as sort of a key player.
Sure.
So, of course, streaming got hit, as the article talks about. Streaming got hit across the board, and their revenues got hit across the board because of that, but also because of the fact that that creator, Will Smith in this case, is connected with every piece of asset in that media company. So you're really not diversifying. So I think if you're creating a media company today, you have to be really serious about, okay, are we tied to any one creator? And back to your point about Pat McAfee. Now, it's super interesting to me. You know, the article talks about Tucker Carlson's having some problems in building an audience outside of Fox. Well, look at the two models. Pat McAfee built an audience first outside of a major news network, and then comes into ESPN and grows significantly because of it. Tucker Carlson had a big audience because of Fox, gets off of Fox, has trouble building his own audience because his audience is back watching Fox on television and not like going to new channels where Tucker is producing his content. So it's really interesting. And so I can see a media company being built from a number of influencers and creators that have first built their own audiences and then come together to build something great. But if you are a traditional media person and then you're saying, oh, I'm going to come off of that media site, I'm going to come off of that distribution and build my own network, that's a very difficult thing to do.